Major scales are much easier to play and actually use to play music once you can quickly picture the notes and the whole shape of the scale on the piano. I want to show you a really simple visual method to do that using just 2 blocks of notes, which you can use for every major scale, where the idea is to practice seeing more notes together in one go. We normally learn the major scale pattern as a series of steps from note to note, which is a perfect way to understand them and allows you to figure out what notes you need. I'm going to show you that too. But only thinking one step at a time like that and having to figure it out from the beginning each time is not really the best way to just see all the notes together on the piano and actually remember where they are whilst you're playing music. This is the C major scale, and this one's easy to see anyway, but it's the clearest example to use first to learn what the pattern is. We're going to start by just getting rid of that top note for now, because we're looking to figure out what the 7 different notes are, and that is just the same as the first one anyway. Now I'm going to change the colour of the first 3 notes to highlight the 2 blocks that I mentioned at the start. But why have I chosen those? Well, if you look at notes 1, 2, and 3, we always number the notes in a scale. These notes are all a whole step apart from each other. From C to D flat would be a half step. So C to D is 2 half steps, which we call a whole step. And then D to E is another 2 half steps, another whole step. Whole steps and half steps are also called tones and semitones. You'll hear that too, more here in the UK, but either way, they both just mean the same thing. So a way to look at the first part of a major scale is as a block of 3 notes a whole step apart. The second block is simply just a block of 4 notes a whole step apart. You see, they all have a black key in between them, just like these ones did. These are now notes 4, 5, 6, and 7 of the major scale. Okay, now the 2 blocks are separated by a half step here. You see, there's no black key between these notes, so this is a half step. Now, when we practice scales up and down, we play the first note again at the top. So we just repeat that note, and that note is a half step above this block. Again, there's no black key here. Now, it's really helpful in general just to take a mental note of where the half steps are. So they're from the 3rd to the 4th degree of the scale, and then from the 7th back to the beginning, or to the octave. So the standard way to look at the scale pattern would be using this series of whole steps and half steps. So starting from C, you'd move up a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. It's important to know that because it helps us understand the major scale pattern, and it makes it clear that a major scale is a specific pattern of notes. Every major scale, of course, contains different notes, but the pattern is the same. The spacing of the notes is the same, and that's why all major scales sound like each other. So you can use that formula to figure out the notes for a major scale beginning from any note. But as we go through the video, you'll see why I think using these blocks has a few advantages. We can repeat the pattern of blocks in multiple octaves. You can see it just repeats. 3, half step, 4, half step, 3, half step, 4. And then the top note again, another half step up. Now we can use that pattern to help us find other major scales. But we'll need to get used to what whole steps look like around different areas of the piano when we have different mixtures of black and white keys. Some whole steps will be 2 white notes like we used earlier, and these all have a black key in between. Some whole steps will be 2 black keys, like here to here, because there's a white note in between them. Then some will be opposite colours. So you've got to watch out for these 2 areas where we have 2 white notes next to each other without a black key in between. So we have a black to white whole step because it's 1, 2 half steps, and then a white to a black whole step, 1, 2 half steps. And that's the same here and here. Let's find the G major scale. So starting from the note G, here's our block of 3 notes, a whole step apart. Then on the note, a half step above that, this is a half step, we begin our block of 4. So the pattern has given us an F sharp because E to F sharp is a whole step. And then we just had a G at the top, which is a half step above the F sharp, the 7th note of the scale. And I'm calling that note an F sharp, not a G flat, because the simple rule that you should remember is that major scales only use one of each of the 7 letters of the musical alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. They don't use any letters twice, and we already had the letter G at the beginning, so we can't also call that a G flat as well. We need to call it F sharp. And this way, the 7th degree of the scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, matches up to the 7th letter along from where we started on G. G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. On sheet music, that also means that every note gets its own position too. Everything's much neater. And here's the pattern in 2 octaves. 3, half step, 4, half step, 3, half step, 4, half step. Looking at F major, you can see the same pattern again. Here's the block of 3 beginning from F, it's just white notes again. Then a half step above that gives us a B flat. So B flat is where we begin the block of 4. And remember that B flat to C is one of those opposite coloured whole steps. So there's our block of 4. Then a half step above that, we've got the F again that we started on. And we call this note a B flat, not an A sharp, because it's the next letter along. F, G, A, B flat. So always remember where those half steps are, from 3 to 4, and then from 7 back to the first note of the scale, where you can just repeat the pattern again. A major is a much wavier shape overall, but I think the blocks make it a bit easier to see. There's the block of 3, and then a half step above that, we begin the block of 4, and then a half step above that, it begins again. This one kind of looks like an extended version of that one as well. Remember, we're trying to see these blocks of notes in one go, but to do that effectively, remember, that's the whole point of this video. I want to help you learn to see these shapes quickly. So in a minute, I want to show you how to actually practice finding blocks yourself, because if you think it looks tricky, you can get good at it quite quickly. And speaking of help, if you think this is a helpful video, then giving it a thumbs up really does help it spread to more people. Remember, we could have also used the step formula to figure out these notes. So from A, that would be a whole step, a whole step, a half step, a whole step, a whole step, a whole step, and a half step. You can't really use that or think about it as you're playing music, because you have to start from the beginning each time and do the whole thing in order. We really need to constantly keep the image of the scale in mind if we want to stay on course, stay inside those boundaries. That familiarity with the shape allows us to lock inside these set of notes whilst we're playing music without getting lost, getting mixed up, or using other notes by mistake that aren't in the scale. When you're playing, you're going to be starting at different points. You're going to be moving around this scale in different directions. You'll need to lock inside of a scale shape like this in all kinds of situations, whether you're playing from memory, reading music, or improvising. And that goes for when you're playing melodies or chords, anything that uses the notes from the scale. And of course, we do also use notes outside of the scale in music, but this is a foundation, a framework you need to get first. So I found with students that using these blocks is just a far more practically useful way of looking at the pattern, which can make the more difficult shapes like this one clearer and quicker to see. We're really just chunking the information into 2 simple parts, and eventually you're just going to be able to see the whole shape. And by practicing this, you're also just improving your ability in general to recognize and find shapes and patterns, which is so important for learning piano, and it's going to help you learn more scales and more chords in the future. I think finding the notes we need and seeing patterns is one of the main challenges for beginners. It certainly was for me. But let me know in the comments, what do you find most challenging about learning piano? Now, of course, just practicing your scales like normal, up and down regularly, is really going to help a lot too. This video isn't really about fingers, just finding the notes. I have other videos on that though. There's some links down below in the pinned comment, but I also have a downloadable guide you can get from the website, which includes images and finger numbers for every major scale. That's actually part of a bundle with minor scales and pentatonic and blues scales as well. They're all very in-depth guides and they cover all the theory you need to know too in a clear step-by-step way. There's a link for those down below as well. We'll do two more quick examples so you can really see this pattern in action. So this is B flat major. Here's our block of 3, half step, block of 4, half step, and repeat, 3, half step, 4, half step. And in this one you can see how the block of 4 kind of looks like an extended version of the block of 3. And then this one is A flat major. Here's our 3, half step, 4, half step, 3, half step, 4, half step. And again, the block of 4 looks like an extended version of the block of 3. The more you get used to the different kinds of shapes you'll see, the easier it is to memorize every major scale. So how can you practice this? So we looked at finding two notes already a whole step apart, and that actually makes a really good warm-up to finding the blocks of 3 and 4. An easy way to practice the blocks of 2, 3 and 4 is to start from the white keys and then start from the black keys. So you can just go up in order like this. Watch out for this one. And then once you've done all the white keys, then do the black keys as well. So watch out for this one. And when that feels comfortable, then you do the same thing again with 3 notes. A little time spent on finding these blocks is really going to help you see any major scale shape easily. And again, we can just start from the white keys, like this. And so on. And then do the same from the black keys. So if you think it feels hard to do the whole scale, you're just doing it in simple parts instead. And when that feels comfortable, you just repeat the same process with 4 notes from the white keys and then from the black keys, trying to play them all together just so you get used to thinking about the blocks as one. I mentioned earlier that it's really useful to number the notes in a major scale, but those numbers do actually have more specific, what we call interval names, which I'll put on screen. These are really worth getting familiar with. You'll hear them all the time. Now, we often refer to the first note of the scale, the key, as the tonic, and then the interval names actually describe the exact spacing of each note, the distance of each note from the first note of the scale. I'll cover intervals in more depth in a separate video though. In the pinned comment in this video, I've put some links to other videos for some other things that are going to help you memorize and get familiar with major scales as well. This video has just been focused on seeing the notes clearly, but I've got other videos on things like the fingerings, learning the chords that come from a major scale, as well as this video here, which gives you a really helpful and logical order with a pattern to learn major scales in. Thanks for watching.